Hello, and thanks for clicking into another edition of Sit Down with Ed Brown. Today's guest, if you haven't heard of him yet, you're going to hear about him really, really soon. He's the guy who's found the bones with the teeth marks. Let's not waste any time. Let's bring him right aboard. Welcome to the show, Mr. Mitchel Townsend. Mr. Townsend, how are you tonight?
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. Just call me Mitch, and thank you for the opportunity to discuss what we've been able to accumulate.
Great. Well, we're definitely looking forward to hearing about it. And there's obviously quite a buzz going on in the community about your findings. And so I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to hear it firsthand and to be the one to share it.
Perfect. Thank you for the opportunity to be the first to share it. We're pretty excited about the findings, and we're hope that your listenership and your audience will be equally as excited.
I think they will be. I want to ask you first, how did you get interested in the whole Bigfoot phenomenon in the first place?
Well, in actuality, I had an experience when I was a young man, about 6 years old, out hunting in Mason County and by myself. And one day I was out there, and I felt really strange. The forest went quiet, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I immediately was petrified and sunk real low into the ground, as low as I could get, and just sat there and listened. And then finally, I was so scared that I shimmied out on a log out in the middle of the swamp and put a shell in my shotgun and waited for whatever it was that I felt was stalking me across the swamp at that point. For about 8 hours, and it was getting dark, I decided that I probably had to get going, and that I had a 12 gauge with me, and I didn't want to be out there after dark.
Sure.
So I worked my way back up to my parents' house, which is about 2 miles away. And I know that sounds like a long hike for a 6-year-old, but that was in the late 60s, and we definitely did a lot of hunting and fishing back then out by ourselves. So that was the first experience that I had. My brother had a similar experience a few years later up in the Olympic Mountains, up in a clear cut. He was just staying for a smoke break, and something started sneaking up on him, and he had this god-awful smell that came over him, and he had the same thing. He had just a panic attack, and he only had his .22 pistol with him at that time, and he never forgot that experience, and we shared similar stories and came to the conclusion that there was just something else going on. After moving into my adulthood, I became more interested in the phenomenon and decided to take a look at the existing evidence and do some analysis in my own right to see if there was something that was missing or there was an area that I could contribute to, and that's where it started. Absolutely.
Sure. So your own personal experience, which would obviously be hair-raising, I mean, especially for a 6-year-old, that would be an insane thing to go through. Did that influence you on your educational pursuits and things of that nature?
Well, not specifically. I had a few really good teachers. I grew up in Mason County down in Shelton, a very similar area to what we have here where I live now out in Lewis County, small lumber and natural resources-based communities. I had a few very excellent teachers who've got me involved in reading and fired the will to learn in me as a way of looking outside the small town that I was raised in to imagine the possibilities. And so I went off and joined the military and was able to get the GI Bill, finished college, and went on to grad school, and decided that my skills were uniquely qualified in order to try to address what I felt were inconsistencies and areas that weren't being addressed in the race to, and it's basically a race in the effort to move the ball down the field in the subject matter.
That's awesome. And now your military background, tell us a little bit about that, because you and I talked about a week ago or so, and we talked at length, and I loved the conversation, by the way. But I want to kind of fill our listeners in, because the qualifications that you have, to me, is pretty impressive. So I want to kind of go over those if you don't mind, but we're going to start with your military background. Kind of tell us about your military background.
Well, I have 12 years of service in the infantry, Army, U.S. United States Army Infantry. I started out in the advanced mechanized cavalry back in the middle 80s and went on to infantry training school at Fort Benning, Georgia, and was awarded my diploma there. I went on to become a non-commissioned officer in the United States Infantry, doing and finishing my tour with Special Operations and under a Green Beret Sergeant Major and a Staff Sergeant over in the Far East. That's where I did my last tour of duty as a tactical language instructor. Part of that training in infantry was tracking tactics, enemy assessment, movement, those kinds of skills that one would need in order to bracket and study and track a very elusive tactical enemy or adversary.
Sure.
And so those skills were highly honed at that time, and they transferred very well into the activities. I've been hunting and fishing most of my life as a percentage Native American, percentage blood Native American. Learned how to track and work in the forest from my grandfather, who was about 60% Cherokee Indian, directly descended from a Cherokee royalty from the Eastern Cherokee Nation. And he gave us a special understanding of the forest and the creatures and the attachment and the connection between the animals and the earth and the feelings that you get in the forest and the ability to track animals. And those skills intermeshed very effectively with the military training that I received. Definitely.
Absolutely. Now, did you begin your college classes and courses while you were in the military?
Yes, I did. As a matter of fact, I worked my way through the military while in school, and unfortunately that took me to a few different junior colleges, and I was finally able to finish my bachelor's degree at the University of Puget Sound in European history with a minor in Chinese and Japanese intellectual philosophy, the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma. Went on to graduate school and took a master's degree in education at the Pepperdine University Graduate School of Education and Psychology down by Malibu, California, down by Los Angeles. I've also 2 classes short of a second master's degree from Gonzaga University Professional School of Studies in Organizational Leadership. I finished my doctoral studies at the University of Calgary at the Graduate Division of Educational Research. All of those graduate school GPAs qualified me for the International Honor Society, as well as the Presidential Honor Rolls up in Canada with a 4.0 in my major, 3.98 cumulative overall. In doctoral studies, 3.92 at Gonzaga and 3.98 at Pepperdine University.
Very impressive. Very impressive. I'm actually working on my second degree, and I thought I was doing good.
Well, in all honesty to your readership, I haven't finished my dissertation, and that's an important distinction that I think that's important to make. And the reason is because, quite frankly, I ran out of money. The amount of money it takes for tuition is very expensive, and it's unfortunately I was in the middle of finishing my dissertation when the President Obama no longer guaranteed student loans for foreign students, and I happen to be a foreign student at a foreign university in Canada, and unfortunately that applied to me, so that's the reason the dissertation hasn't been finished. It's sitting right here, almost finished, but it can't be submitted, so it's a definite probability for me. So
now the dissertation, what degree will you get when and if you turn that in?
If I decided to go back at this point, because it's been a couple of years, I would probably have to retake a significant portion of another doctoral program. If I went back to the University of Calgary, it would probably let me in as an advanced placement student, and I would finish the degree, which is what I've been working on, which is an education doctorate in technology and learning technologies. Mm-hmm. And the reason I'm interested in those types of things is because it enables me to, 1, do advanced level research, and 2, package it in a way that can be presented to different audiences effectively and efficiently.
Sure. And you're only just a dissertation away from having that, correct?
That's it. Not even a dissertation, because the dissertation is finished. It's sitting there on my desk. I just can't turn it in.
Well, I find that very, Very impressive. I mean, you obviously got a great background in the military as well as educational, and I think that's going to play into your favor when everything starts to come out. Which I guess I'll let you announce when it's coming out. I know you. We'll get to that in a minute. But I definitely want you to announce that. But the educational background that you have is basically in education, correct?
That is correct. Education, technologies, and computers, and organizational research.
Gotcha. And it's the fact that you have that which helps you become qualified for the, upper level research. Is that kind of what you're saying, right?
I would say this, is that having researched several topics and written over 96 straight A papers at the graduate level, that I have proven myself the ability to write at the doctoral level on pretty much any subject except advanced mathematics and physics.
Sure.
Myself, I would say this, is that each of us is a scholar, each of us is a scientist, because one doesn't have a degree in religion or chemistry. That doesn't preclude one from self-educating and creating the skills and putting together the competencies one would need in order to intelligently discuss any level of discourse. In the case of what we're looking at, I stand on the shoulders of all of the credentialed anthropological scientists that come before me, like Mr. Meldrum, Mr. Bindernagel, among other luminaries, Mr. John Green, among other luminaries. So the science, the anthropological science, primatological science, has pretty much been done already by other highly credentialed scientists in those fields.
Sure.
What we have concentrated on is just what we found. We're not speculating beyond that. And so we feel qualified. I have two other research partners. One of them has a degree in biological sciences. We feel qualified in order to discuss what we found, in order to make evidence-based comparisons in the literature and in visual comparisons, and then allow credentialed scientists and the general public to check the science and to make sure the science is accurate.
Very well put. And I think I agree 100%. All right. We are going to move forward now. We obviously, you're qualified. I'm with you 100% on that. Let's get into what you found. I mean, so you're out. I guess you're conducting a class, and if you could just kind of tell us a little bit about the class you're conducting.
Well, let me bring it a little farther back than that and give you the chronology of what we have here, because I want your readers to understand that we're presenting this paper in its fullness and complete. We were taking them from the minute I stepped off my truck into the bush till the time we publish.
Okay.
So what we've basically done is this. I go up to the Mount St. Helens region every year in the spring to go fishing in lakes that don't have trails. And so the fishing is much better, obviously, if there's people that don't generally want to bushwhacking. And it also helps me refine my tracking skills that get rusty over the winter to prepare for the summer. And so I was on my way up to Morton, up towards Ryan Lake, and the place that I usually go to, and straight off the trail on the way up this ascending valley, and noticed a pile of bones off to the side, which was very strange because you would never see bones stacked in the bush at all, because they're generally pulled apart by scavengers or they're recycled into the forest floor fairly quickly, especially here in the Northwest. So I made a note of it, and I was actually out, in all honesty, shooting video footage for a public relations project related to this phenomenon and these questions, and looking for footage anyway, and was out there and found those stack of bones and decided it was just a little bit odd because I had never seen a stack of bones like that before.
Sure.
So I continued on my destination, did some fishing, some camping, and had some other experiences farther up the mountain that were quite intense, related, I thought, might be related to other activity. It didn't dawn on me at the time that the bone pile potentially would be evidence of some type of hominid feeding strategy. We did have some quote-unquote Bigfoot activity at the top of the hill and made some notations about that. On the way back down the hill, I stopped by that same location I had fixed on my GPS compass and did a preliminary site survey laid out some blue survey tape and made some measurements, preliminary measurements, looked at the placement of the debris field. And once again, it really just came back to me that the forest was just quiet, like a tomb. And it reminded me instantaneously of when I was 6 years old and I had that same phenomenon. And so I was on high alert, as you can imagine, at that point.
Sure.
And I pulled up a few of the samples, and it looked like they had been gnawed on with flat teeth, flat incisor-looking teeth. More so than that, it just dawned on me that something had sat there and ate these animals, of which there were 2 deer based on the skull evidence present, and literally it seemed they had dropped the bones between their legs in a pile after they had got done chewing on them. And looking at the teeth marks, it confirmed that initial premonition, if you might want to say. Pulled them back a little bit and saw some other types of activity down there. Thought there might be a few bare fingers that turned out to be just lower leg digits from the deer that had been consumed in that pile. Really realized at that point that something's not right here, that this is a scientific find. Because like I said, I was already out there anyway shooting video, looking for evidence. And so when I came across that forensic dental evidence, and I thought, this is worth collecting. It didn't dawn on me what it might be. It dawned on me that it wasn't a natural configuration of bone products in the forest, simply.
Right.
And so I collected the requisite samples that I found that had specific types of tooth signatures, flat tooth signatures, collect them and took them back with me. At that point, I called BFRO and asked them to send out an investigator, and Mr. Jeff Robinson came out. He's an investigator out of Portland, Oregon, another very well-respected and extremely intelligent individual. He met me out close to the site, and he came up and surveyed the site, interrogated me concerning my observations, measurements, and the chronology of the events, and came to the same conclusions that I did, that it was not a generally or a currently classified resident carnivore taxa or scavenger taxa in that ecosystem. There was no predator impressions, no canine impressions, and some of the bones still had fresh meat attached or dried meat. And there was no other evidence of scavenging activity, which was really strange.
Wow.
Right? Wow is correct. And so, but once again, we're at a dead end. And I'm asking myself, what do I do? How do I resolve this? It was just like a burning coal in your pocket, burning its way out like a dollar bill, because it just consumed me. And I looked through the literature and decided that the answers just weren't there. And so I created the first ever Bigfoot class at the college level called CSI Bigfoot, and taught that at Centralia College in the Department of Continuing Education. Was privileged to teach that at that college and Lower Columbia College in the spring and fall of 2014 to develop a network of eyes and ears to look for other types of that evidence profile. Because I knew at that time that if Bigfoot, or whatever you want to call it, by the way, Bigfoot's not mentioned in the paper. For those of you who really care about the terminology, we're not interested in proving that. We're interested in giving you the facts of exactly what we found, and you can take it from there.
Gotcha.
So, having said that, moving forward, right, I wanted to do network of eyes and ears. Well, 2 of the students in my class down in Lower Columbia called me 3 months later and had found 2 similar stacks of bones at different locations on the Lewis River side of Mount St. Owen. So we went from an independent site to now parallel sites that are geographically separated with the same type of evidence profiles, bone stacks with seemingly giant human front incisor marks notched into them. And with no evidence of current human activity to include fire or heat processing of the bones, arrow damage, firearm damage, or any other saw marks, any tool marks whatsoever. And one of the stacks still had flesh attached as well. There was a few small predator canine marks on one of the bones, probably a small weasel or a ferret or a marten, but that's it. One of the sites had no predator marks, and the other site had just a few small ones. I went up there and did the site survey. They would have never known what to look for if they wouldn't have seen the bone samples that I brought into the college course.
Right.
So they immediately put two and two together and marked off the sites and surveyed them as well and collected the bone evidence. So then what we have, and called me. So now what we have is 3 independently, geographically separated prey deposition sites of unexplained circumstance.
Now, the height of the mountain on all 3 sites, were they all 3 very similar in elevation, or were they different heights, different areas?
Interesting that you mentioned that, and that's part of what our theory is, and that's part of, let me give you the outlines of the paper. So what I'll do now is I'm going to give you the title of the paper, and then we'll break it down from there. The title of the paper for your listeners is Using Biotic Taphonomy Signature Analysis and Neo-Ichnology Profiling to Determine the Identity of the Carnivore Taxa Responsible for the Deposition and Mechanical Mastication of 3 independent prey bone assemblages in the Mount St. Helens ecosystem of the Cascade Mountain Range. Okay. And very simply, we used a combination of forensic biotic taphonomy. Very simply for your readers in layman's terms, it's examining tooth signatures of predators or hominids to determine what type of organism was responsible for that, what type of damage on a specific cadaver or type of post-mortem evidence. The neo-ichnology is a theory to develop a profile, a behavior profile of a specific creature to determine relevance to previous species in the fossil record. So what we have is a combination scientific discipline framework to examine the forensic dental bone evidence and cross-reference that and hopefully mutually support with behavioral evidence. And that is our research structure on that paper.
So basically you find these bones, they have teeth marks on them, and your paper is basically just saying, this is what I found. What is it?
Perfect. And very simply, the paper is, this is what we found. This is how we're going to examine it within these 2 disciplines, which are subdisciplines of other scientific disciplines like paleozoology. And we're presenting the evidence. Not only are we presenting the evidence within context, but we're examining it within the literature and allowing the readership to compare not only contextually within the literature, but also side-by-side visual comparisons of that evidence. And if you want me to, I'll give you readers a breakdown of exactly what we found.
Please do.
Wonderful. So let's start from the top. Now, we've got 2 profiles of evidence. The first is taphonomy evidence or tonophrographic evidence, and what that relates to is what type of tooth structure that we are able to identify and whether that tooth structure is responsible for the bone damage evidence that we see. Okay? Now, after charting the shape of the tooth, first of all, we went through and eliminated every possible known resident species to include cougar, bear, and wolverine, as well as lynx. That was pretty easy because there wasn't any other track and predator tooth marks, except for the small ones with the weasel, the marten. And what we looked at in the literature, after we examined every tooth mark, we charted and examined and measured very carefully every tooth impression. And what they're called is dentition morphophysiology is what we're trying to establish. We're trying to establish the tooth structure, the tooth pattern, and from there we can extrapolate the bite radius and the measurements between the upper intercanines. It's called the intercanine width measurements. That allows us to compare that dental structure or that dental physiomorphology with other known creatures, because that's part of taphonomy, is charting and mapping those tooth structures in order to identify the carnivore taxa that was responsible for generating that evidence.
Sure.
Okay, in this case, it's called dental lobe avulsion attributed evidence. Very simply, it means something bit out pieces of bone out of another creature and left specific and measurable cutouts of tooth structure, size, and disposition.
Okay.
We went back through the literature, I did, and looked and see what types of diagnostic structures, citations, and literatures was available that paralleled the evidence that we were seeing on those bones. That would enable us to determine if it was indeed something that we were currently aware of, classified, or something that was currently unclassified at that point. The conclusions we came to, based on the initial analysis of the two sides themselves, showed us that of all of the original measurements, we were able to generate 25 very distinctive measurements on what we assume, based upon the dentition morphophysiology, as front, central, and lateral incisors, based on the tooth shape. Okay? So we went through and charted the average size tooth shape. And then we went through and compared that against the data that we had collected from all three sites. The range put it over 92% of the measurements outside the range of human possibility of central and lateral incisor measurements, as discussed in the literature, current literature. So that's the first piece of evidence that we have, is lateral and central incisor dental lobe avulsion attributed evidence, or cutouts, that are 92% beyond the possibility of your average Homo sapien, yet similar in tooth shape and structure. There's your first piece of evidence for your readers, or your listeners. The second one is that looking at the way the bones are chewed on, there's specific diagnostic strategies that are characteristic of human mastication or human chewing, because our mouth is structured in a specific way. Once again, it's limited by our specific dentophysiomorphology, or the shape of our teeth determines the shape of our jaw, etc. That creates a specific pattern when something with that characteristics, or those diagnostic characteristics, chews up bones. The first one is a macro level evaluation, and is called bone peeling, or bone chewing. And what it means is that as a hominid or hominoid, or a hominid, however you want to describe it, and we'll get to the characteristics of each designation, is chewing on the ends of the bone. They have to put it in their mouth in a certain geometrical angle. And that creates specific signatures on the edges of the bone. It's called bone peeling. Within that, there are specific characteristics. One is bent bone ends, masticate ends, or chewed ends, crenellated ends, which mean they're just chewed and there's microdermal fractures, double arch punctures, triangular shaped premolar impressions, and linear mark evidence. Okay, those are all within the category of bone peeling. So as a hominid chews bones, they leave specific diagnostic signatures based upon our tooth structure and jaw physiology or layout.
Sure.
And those are double arch structures. There's three types of bone peeling. One of them is classic, one of them is general, and the other one is incipient. And rather than bore your readers, your listeners, with specific scientific definitions, all three sites exhibited all types of that bone peeling, rib peeling, mastication, macro level strategy. So there's your second clue. The first is the tooth size, distribution, shape. It's bigger and outside, but it's the same structure and shape. The second one is bone peeling. All right, that's a diagnostic human or hominid mastication or chewing strategy. Then we have evidence of double arch structures. All right, and what that is as those bones are being chewed on the edges, it's being pushed in your mouth and chewed on by your premolars. All right, and what that does is it leaves a very definitive and diagnostic injury, or an avulsion attributed piece of material that's cut out of whatever the injury is attributed, or whatever the injury, the material that received that trauma.
Sure.
All right? And so if you're looking at that, microscopically. We didn't have to bring it up too high. As cited in Fernando Jalva's and Alves 2010 as a, and I quote, a double arch premolar impression signature is another identifiable characteristic of hominid mastication activity, as described in Fernando Jalva Alves 2010. We put a side-by-side comparison of, in this case, sample elk kill number 1 rib 3C mark, and have clear and definitive evidence of double arch premolar impressions, which is a characteristic diagnostic hominid mastication strategy underneath the rubric of bone peeling strategy. So there's number 3. The next thing we have is triangular-shaped molar load impression evidence. So as a human or a hominid, choose a hard material over and over with our premolars or molars. The cusps or the points, the elevated points on that tooth, leave a specific dental signature. In the case of a hominid, it's triangular shaped. In the case of a primate, it would be round. So if a monkey or a large ape or a bonobo bit into this bone, you would see a diagnostically characteristic round shape. If it was a hominid human mastication, then it would be triangular. We have clear and convincing evidence of that triangular molar impression on at least one sample, and I'm looking at it right now, that's definitive, that's clear with very little magnification. And we also have 2 or 3 other possibilities, but we don't have the money in order to get an electron microscope. That's part of the reason we're doing this, is to open up a series of directions for cross-disciplinary research. So that's number 4. The next one is number 5. It's called shallow linear bone scoring. It's also diagnostic. So that's number 5. We have evidence of that as well on 3 different areas, including a vertebra sample. So we have 5 diagnostic characteristics of early hominoid activity that are all underneath the macro-level rubric of bone peeling. When taken in totality, what you have is hominid, humanoid, bone mastication strategies, tooth sizes, molar signatures, double arch structures, and linear bone scoring, all mutually complementary and all say the exact same thing: hominid tooth load impressions.
Simply meaning that whatever is doing this is more human than ape.
More human than anything else. I don't want to use the term ape, but if it was ape-like or primate-like, it would have a different molar structure. It would just have some different molar load impression signature.
Gotcha.
So there's 5 pieces of interlocking bite evidence to include shape, size, mastication strategies that are clearly and only diagnostic of human beings based upon our mouth size and tooth dental morphology, the shape of our teeth. All right? Now, here's the one, and here's the 6th and final piece of evidence that we've discovered so far. Okay. And this is a shocker to the Bigfoot community. I took some time and started looking at the angle, the radial arc angle of the impressions or the dental low divulsion attributed injuries, the cutouts, the dental cutouts. They were significantly different than modern human radial arc measurements, front incisors. In other words, they were shovel-shaped incisors, as opposed to, let me give an analogy for your listeners.
Sure.
Modern human beings or Homo sapiens generally have what you could describe as square point shovel teeth. A very little angle, radial arc angle. It's almost a 45-degree angle before the vertical and lateral horizontal surfaces of a front tooth, lateral incisor or front central incisor. A shovel-shaped tooth has literally a radial arch like a round point shovel.
Gotcha.
Which is definitely diagnostically different than modern Homo erectus or Homo sapien. Although there is evidence of similar tooth structure resident to a small degree in Asiatic Native Americans that have migrated down through the Bering Sea land bridge. But they don't have the same level of intensity of this shovel-shaped structure as they had, say, 500 years ago, because genetically they've been interbreeding or hybridization with Caucasian Americans. So you're starting to see the lessening of that structure, that shovel-tooth structure. In the case of our samples, we did a mathematical comparison between all of the samples, the main samples, and we used a human test subject and got a very high degree of accuracy between our extrapolated measurements, or radial arc measurements on these teeth, and modern human teeth. The curvature of the teeth arc, radial teeth arc, on the bone stacker sites is over double the radial arc measurement of contemporary modern human teeth. And I'm looking at some Arizona State University's dentition charts right now, curvature charts and shovel-shaped teeth charts. They, just through a cursory visual analysis, they're on the high end, the very high end of the shovel-shaped chart, as opposed to down on the low end, which would be modern human beings.
Gotcha.
The correlation, or the diagnostic correlation in anthropology, would be Neanderthal. That's a characteristic of Neanderthal dental morphology, which is that shovel-shaped tooth structure. Not the radial arc measurements that we have, once again, I'll reiterate, are over double the size of modern contemporary humans. So once again, you have a sixth piece of evidence that clearly and definitively, side-by-side comparisons show that whatever made these dental illusion injuries or dental cutouts not only used human chewing strategies, had a human-shaped jaw with teeth that are twice the size, but it had shovel-shaped incisors, which strongly suggests a connection to previous types of hominid species on our evolutionary line. In this case, it's a diagnostic characteristic of Neanderthal. Unfortunately, we didn't have any clear molar impressions, full molar impressions that we could measure out and look for other types of molar Neanderthal diagnostic molar impression profile evidence. So it's suspect. That is, I think that could easily be determined through microdermal abrasion analysis. Now, here's the really interesting part about that. I got to looking at 4 or 5 different samples of those tooth cutouts, and I'm just finished looking at the literature on the double labial curve, or the shovel tooth, some of the specific characteristics of the shovel tooth shape. One of them is a double labial curve. We have a single edge generally on our incisor. The edges that I'm talking about are a double edge. Okay, and it leaves a specific mastication impression as well. I am not positive, and we could settle this with microdermal abrasion analysis, an electron microscope, but it seems clear evidence of a double labial curve tooth impressions in these cutouts as well, based upon a simple, very simple observation. Okay, and by superimposing those teeth into the cutout marks themselves, they clearly match.
Now, let me ask, because, I'm obviously no dental expert, and I just want to make sure I understand. Are you saying that there's a possibility that there's 2 rows of teeth? Is that what you're saying, or did I misunderstand that?
No. No, that's not what I'm saying, and let us be clear.
Good.
A shovel-shaped tooth specifically has a curvature that is significantly more curved than modern Homo sapien tooth. Okay.
Gotcha. Okay.
What I'm saying is, when I say a double labial curve, all that means, and your anthropologists and paleontologists will immediately know what I'm talking about, is imagine your front tooth. If you run your finger on it, it's got a sharp edge, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Imagine another edge right behind that, real close, within, say, a millimeter or 2, paralleling the same front edge with a consistent distance apart. So you have 2 small edges, the front edge and another one right behind it, real close to it, on the same tooth. So instead of cutting something and getting a single edge cut, theoretically, if the double labial curve was wide enough and the circumstances were correct, you could get a double labial edge shovel tooth incisor impression on the receiving material. And if you look at bone evidence from all 3 sites, it clearly could fit right into those tooth marks. Now that's beyond, obviously we need, and this is part of the reason we're doing this, is to set a baseline profile so the credentialed scientists, whom we all owe a huge debt of gratitude to,
sure,
can take this material, evaluate it, and then move forward in a way that they feel teases the most value out of the data. And so there's I've just given you 6 very clear human diagnostic mastication characteristics, including shovel-shaped front teeth, which is characteristic of Neanderthal. I'm not saying that's what it is. I'm saying that's what the evidence very, very, very strongly exhibits.
Sure.
That's the forensic dental evidence. The other side of the evidence, go ahead. Go ahead and ask me some questions about that before we move on to the behavioral profile evidence.
Yes. The size of the impressions, do they give you any indication of the size of the individual making the impressions?
Not from the teeth, but from the footprint we found and the track line we measured, absolutely. And we can get into that because that is part of the neo-ichnological evidence as opposed to forensic dental evidence. Because remember, we have a dual research framework, and we address that in the neo-ichnological section, which is what we'll discuss in a minute. One last piece of information, and this is your 7th type of human mastication strategy. From that evidence that I just gave you, specifically the size evidence of the teeth, we can extrapolate what's called a bite radius. And that allows us to determine, based on tooth size, what the radius of the mouth would be. Perfect. In the case of our control subject, the radius was 0.750, and that's about average. In the case of the largest tooth radius measurements on the bone stack site, it was 1.65, over double the size of the mouth radius, a bite radius. Then you take that measurement. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so whatever left that impression would have had a mouth twice the size of ours.
Over double the size, the tooth. Now, you can extrapolate on that tooth size. Once you identify which teeth you're measuring, you mirror that, and then you can measure what's called the intercanine distance. And that's between, in our case, it's upper canine to canine measurement. And that gives you literally the arc of your mouth of your bite, your upper bite. So if you had a pair of upper mouth dentures, that would be your measurement. That's an intercanine distance measurement based on your bite radius. In the case of our control subject, the intercanine distance measurements was 1.285, which is about average for our control subject. In the case of the bone stacker, it was 2.710, over twice again the size of the mouth. So you're looking at a mouth that has over twice the size of the teeth and over twice the size of the bite radius, which equal to an extrapolated, constructed intercanine distance measurement that, once again, is over twice the size of a human mouth. So you hear what I keep saying here is twice the size of the teeth, twice the size of the mouth, twice the size of the bite radius, yet human or hominid-like.
So it's been consistent. You're getting a consistent reading regardless of what you're measuring.
Exactly. Very consistent reading on the data that it's hominid of some large size, diagnostic characteristic, human morphological tooth structure with a giant, well, I don't want to say giant, with a mouth size and a bite radius that's over double the size of a modern contemporary human. And that's our forensic dental evidence.
Excellent.
And it's all mutually is interlocking and supporting. So we don't have one piece of evidence that suggests something else that's not sure. It all says the exact same thing. And in the document, in the essay, people will see that. We've compared it in the literature, and we've put it visually side by side. It's clear as day. It's right in front of them. There will be no misunderstanding of what they're looking at because it's that clear.
Sure.
With basic to little magnification. And so you've got 6 specific hominid mastication strategies and characteristics based upon the evidence that we collected. period. And that's the end of the information on the forensic dental side of it. The next is the neuroichnological or behavioral side, evidence.
Okay. So let's go ahead and dive right into that thing. First of all, the tooth evidence is fascinating. I mean, that's incredible. I do have one more quick question, if you don't mind, on the tooth real quick. Was there any way to determine how long the bones had been there before you discovered them? Did you have any indication of that?
Absolutely. And that's one of the most important things we did is when we examined the bones, the first thing that we did was determine the age of the bones. Okay, we wanted to make sure that what we were looking at was something reasonably current, and if it wasn't, we were able to determine the age of them. Okay, and let me see if I can find it here on the paper. Basically, what we found was this. In all cases, the bones were fresh. There was meat left on them, and there was no evidence of moss, fire damage, heat processing, or anything else. And the Journal of Forensic Taphonomy, which is one of the corner posts to our forensic taphonomy examination framework, describes the weather process in terms of 6 weathering stages, WS0 through WS5, based upon linear cracking, flaking of the cortical surfaces, followed by formations of rough fibrous texturing and loss of structural integrity, as cited in Pokey's and Science 2013, page 292. So we've designated these as clearly WS0 designation, or the absolute very lowest, because it exhibited no weathering whatsoever and maintained flexibility and structural integrity. They were green bones. And when you look at the triangular impression of the premolar dental lobe, you can tell that it's a green bone when it was bitten into, because it has clear triangular load impression. But when it pushed in and then pulled back out, the tooth structure did, it wanted to flex back. So some of the bone material flexed back a little bit and filled back in, which strongly denotes or designates that that was green or a very fresh bone at the time.
Great. Well, I definitely wanted to point that out, because I did read through some of the discussions going on Facebook about this subject, that someone had mentioned, well, how do they know that a rodent didn't do it? And then over time, the tooth marks got bigger.
They don't do that. That's not possible.
Okay, not possible. Okay.
Not possible. And another thing, rodent teeth have a specific structure. They have a specific layout. They have a specific dental morphology, dentition-specific dental physiomorphology. And the only animals that could even possibly be close, based on the bone stacking behavior, would be a wolverine. All right? A rodent has 2 sets of incisors, top and bottom, and they channel. They don't snap out or make impressions. And it's equal from the bottom and the top. So you can imagine a backhoe that has a blade that snaps together, equally lower, upper, and lower, lower. That would be a rodent. And a rodent doesn't have shovel-shaped incisors. A rodent has flat, straight teeth. So I appreciate that observation by the person on that forum, but it's obvious, and this is part of the problem, is that people make questions or assumptions based upon a very poor understanding of the science, or don't take the time to actually investigate the possibilities before they ask the question. And that's a quintessential issue with discussion boards, is they tend to get off science and off topic very easily.
Absolutely. All right, I have one more question about the bones, and then we'll move forward, I promise. And I think that this is a very fair question to ask. And I believe I mentioned this to you when we talked last week as well, but you mentioned that there's meat left on the bone.
Correct.
Now, is it possible that there is some DNA evidence from saliva still left on that meat if they were basically gnawing the bone and then stacking them? Is there any possibility of getting any DNA evidence off that?
I'm not a geneticist, so I can't tell you one way or the other. My understanding is that that DNA present in saliva breaks down extremely quickly in the natural environment. My guess, and this is just a guess, don't quote me, you can if you want to, your readers can, but my guess is no, absolutely not, unless that was a fresh kill within hours or a day or two. having a layman's understanding of genetic processing and collection, I would say probably not. If material was left that could be attributed to this unidentified carnivore taxa, like it broke a tooth off, or it left a piece of its meat, or a piece of blood, or some hair, I'm sure that that would be great evidence for a geneticist to examine, but that's way beyond my understanding at this point, sure.
And do you have...
One other thing I want to get back to is you asked about elevation.
Yeah.
And that's interesting you should mention that, is all the elevations were within 2,900 to 3,900 feet in elevation. They were all at pinch point, what could be construed as pinch point or ambush kill sites within close proximity to water and red and black huckleberries. So there was other evidence of bones on site number 2, which we called EK number 2 or bone pile number 2. They were down the hill a ways, so someone could very easily extrapolate that that type of ambush activity had been going on there for some time. We did find some bones lower down the hill that had been processed by humans. They had saw marks on some of the bones themselves, but they were a couple years old. They were on the weathering stage. They were probably a 6. They had moss on them and everything else. And so what's also interesting is that no predators had worked these bones except a small amount of initial, with fresh meat still attached. So that leaves one to potentially extrapolate that those had been marked, whether a urine-based substance or that creature or whatever was responsible for that was still in the area. Regardless, the fact that we have an alteration in naturally occurring behavior in scavenger taxa strongly suggests that whatever marked that territory either marked it or is currently resident to the area, and you can extrapolate that the animals that are not doing the scavenging in violation of their naturally occurring activity are very aware and know completely what type of creature left that evidence contemporaneously and historically, and that's why they're avoiding it.
Gotcha.
That would be, an estimation or an extrapolation. Based on the literature, wolverines do mark their territory, but primarily to keep males away and to attract multiple females. We were able to definitively eliminate that. And it boils down to, is this naturally occurring current Homo sapien activity, or is it something else? The Department of Fish and Wildlife says it's something else.
Well, obviously, a wolverine won't have large footprints that it left behind either. So, I guess that would be another way to eliminate the wolverine. So
absolutely, and it has different tooth structure. It literally rips bones up. It chews right through them. It doesn't nibble on the edges and peel them. It literally consumes them. And it doesn't stack them either.
Right, right. Yeah, it's going to run off with what it can, eat it, come back and get more. You're absolutely right.
Exactly.
Is there any evidence that they were trying to get to the marrow?
Yes, there is. Part of the bone peeling strategy is chewing on the ends and exposing the marrow. One of the this is one of the cautionary notes for your listeners is, don't collect the evidence. Mark the evidence, survey it with a survey tape, and call one of us. I unfortunately did not collect one of the bones that looked like a large leg bone from one of the deer that was killed at Bone Stack Site number 1. And I looked back at the video, and it had more distinctive evidence of human chewing mastication activity. And this is one of the problems of not having, and I'll admit this readily, this is part of the problems of not having an advanced anthropology degree, is I didn't know what I was looking at.
Sure.
And I didn't know how to process the scene as well as I should have. And so I missed that piece of evidence. Luckily, I've photographed everything and made, intense measurements and videotaped it. So I still have the evidence of it. So what bothers me in the back of my mind is what didn't I pick up?
Right.
One interesting thing was both skulls had their noses or their snout areas crushed in with what looked to be like blunt force trauma in the shape of a half circle to possibly suggest a branch, a bat, or a rock. And they were laid in the same general orientation, snout downhill. The other deer, the elk that had been killed at the first site, had also blunt force trauma, catastrophic skull fracture. Same half-circle dent impression to possibly suggest branch, bat, or rock. The other site had catastrophic spinal separation. Something ran it down or jumped on it and broke its back at mid-spine and separated it completely. One half was found in another location about 30 feet away. No evidence of disease, no evidence of rock fall, tree damage, arrow, firearm, spear, anything.
Sure. No human
What's
intervention.
really interesting is the disarticulation sequence. In other words, when an animal or a cadaver decomposes, it decomposes in specific stages called diagenesis.
Correct.
As the bones lose their connective tissue, they drop off the vertebral column. Well, they drop off in a specific and predictable manner on top of the vertebra. In our case, in all three sites, the vertebra had been separated from the rib bones had been separated from the vertebra by snapping them off, leaving no tool marks or tooth structures that would denote or show how much pressure it would take to snap off green bone off vertebra. Now, if one vertebrae was snapped off, it'd be an anomaly. But they were all snapped off in exactly the same fashion, in exactly the same way, and had a lack of evidence as to what would take something like that and snap it off the vertebra. One could extrapolate it was a hand, as
Right.
opposed to a canine with very large and snappy jaws.
Sure.
So that is the edges of and evidence of the bone taphonomic evidence, the forensic dental impression evidence. And once again, it all is mutually supporting and interlocking and says the exact same thing.
Right, right. I think that something you said, it really kind of caught my attention. You said they were all laying with the nose facing downhill.
That is correct. On bone site number 1, the other 2 sites, it was inconclusive as to how they died as opposed to where they laid. In the catastrophic spinal separation, it looked like it came down from an elk trail, was ambushed, and then killed, and then because there was some evidence, like I said, the upper skull and the upper part of the spine was about 20 feet up the trail, in that case, that distribution site. And the lower carcass was partial, the lower bones was farther down the trail. So there was catastrophic spinal separation, but there wasn't a log. There wasn't a rock that had fallen on it.
Right.
Unexplained.
Interesting. All right. So we've got through that aspect of the paper. I guess the next one is the footprints and what you found along with that, if you want to continue.
Absolutely. So ichnology is a sub-discipline of paleological science. And what you're looking at is looking for traces of an organism in the fossil record, okay? You're looking for fossils. You're looking for tracks, fossilized tracks. You're looking for burrows. You're looking for scat, coprolites. You're looking for material. You're looking for dens. You're looking for behaviors, and that would include prey selection, disarticulation strategies, what types of bones you eat, what types of animals you select to eat, what types of surviving bones are left in the stack. All of those are diagnostic of what type of species would attack a specific food source, and not only that, but where on the location of that cadaver or post-mortem remains that animal would actually attack for different nutritional values. And so that's a very, very well-known and robust science. Dr. Meldrum uses that type of science to examine the footprints. And I'm sure you can ask neoichnology, it's called. But wildlife biologists are practicing neoichnology. Neoichnology just means current organisms. So the neoichnological information that we're looking at, let me pull the paper back up because I want to make sure I'm as accurate as possible for your listeners. It's extremely important that there's no speculation here. Okay, let me get back down to that section. And let me give you the big ones first, okay? The main element that brought us to the site was the bone stacking behavior, all right? No other animal in the animal kingdom in the world, to include chimpanzees, and I talked to Dr. Craig Stanford from Stanford University about that and coordinated with him to determine if chimpanzees stacked bones. He's observed them in the wild and definitively states that they don't.
Okay.
So I contacted the Department of Fish and Wildlife, Washington State, and they put me in touch with their bear and cougar specialist with the Karelian Bear Dog Program, and he examined not in context, but just the stacks themselves. And I quote, Mr. Townsend, to me the bones look like they were placed there by humans, illegal bait for a hunt site. You looked at a lot of species to explain this, but in my experience with carnivores, this one is likely tied to Homo sapiens. He was unaware of the footprint we found, the track lines. He was also unaware of the size of the teeth and the shape of the teeth that we had found.
Gotcha.
I did that intentionally because I didn't want him to be prejudiced to the examination based upon historical predispositions or prejudices. And so I gave him in isolation that one specific piece of information because that's what he specialized in. So if you compare a wolverine cache, which is the only other animal that exhibits that type of behavioral predisposition, it's not even close. A wolverine won't stack bones. It'll drag bones and create a cache during the winter for its kids as a protein source that it can pull up in the late spring so its kids don't starve. But it's not the same thing. And I laid out all the wolverine dentition and everything for comparative analysis as the only possible alternative so the readership, in your case the listenership, could make that determination and see that the obvious difference is there. So it's the bone stacking behavior goes back to the literature. It's been a quintessential human behavior since time immemorial for many different reasons, to include shelter, fuel, musical instruments, weapons, usually processed into some other type of functional utility. Like I said, to include tools, weapons, and fuel, and building materials. So humans have a long history of functionally using bone materials for a variety of different reasons and processes.
Absolutely.
Which confirmed what the Department of Fish and Wildlife said, that it was a human or a homo, in his case, Homo sapien, homo-type activity, hominid.
Right.
Which once again dovetails and supports the other dental evidence, tooth evidence, mouth size, bite radius evidence. Another piece of confirming evidence that we're in the right area, that it's not an anomaly. And we have the same bone stacking behavior across all three sites. So we're looking at consistency here in evidence all the way through every piece of evidence. And now we have our main bone stacking evidence is once again clearly diagnostic of hominid or hominoid behavior. All right. So we have that. That is the main piece of evidence that's collected at the site. The other part of the site information is the elevation, the proximity to water, the terrain analysis, the elimination of the wolverine and other types of species, to finer and finerly sift the information to, at the end of the day, there's only one possibility.
Right.
Okay? So we get to that, and the last piece of evidence, and let me make sure I give you the exact measurements.
Sure.
Within 1/2 of a mile of the third site, which would be EK, elk site number 2, designated bone pile number 2, my research partners, Mr. Gerald Mills and his son, Mr. Aaron Mills, came across a 100-yard track line.
Wow. With
3 readable 16-inch footprints, one of which we casted successfully. They made very, very careful measurements. The track was exactly 16 inches long, 7 inches across the ball, or what we consider the ball of the foot, 4.5 inches across the heel, and approximately 3 1/4 inch deep pushed into the hardpack substrate. Wow. The track line measured 72 inches, the track line measured a step of 72 inches with a stride heel to heel of 144 inches. Okay, so by comparison, the step length and stride line measure more than double the average contemporary human Homo sapien male and almost triple that of the average female as compared above. The track print itself had a 43% width, 7 inches to length, 16-inch proportional measurement. The average human measurement has a 33% proportional width, 3.6 inches to a length of 10.76 inches. So once again, you have a 10% more proportional measurement in proportions outside of the range of contemporary Homo sapien, and more than double the stride and step length of the average human male Homo sapien. Once again, we're back to double with the proportional measurements, the proportional tooth measurements, proportional bite measurements, the shovel-shaped incisors. Now we have proportional footprint measurements and step length measurements that are within 2.5 to 3 times, which was in our range of 2 to 2.5 times the average size of proportional teeth, proportional step length, etc., etc. So the track line, they used a technique called tracking stick, which I taught them to, my grandfather taught me, to determine where the track is and then cut the length or a notch on your track stick to determine the distance between the tracks, and then you lay the track stick down in a circular arc to determine which direction the track line came from, and then you track it back from there. We tracked it back over 100 yards over the substrate till we lost it in the soft duff. And that's how we were able to consistently and confirm over a series of terrains and materials a consistent step length and track length. The interesting part is we tracked this creature over logs, and one could easily extrapolate that it was trying to intentionally not leave any track whatsoever, because it didn't take a straight route. It took routes through the heaviest bush and over logs, linearly and horizontally, in order to get to wherever it was going, whatever its destination was, but not leave any tracks. So it got extremely difficult, and we're talking just minor scuff marks right at the end.
Sure. So obviously this indicates intelligence.
I would say more than intelligence. I would say it indicates purpose, strategy, and understanding, which is paralleled in chimpanzee studies, that they're aware of their tracks, and they take, at times, steps to cover their tracks up. And there's been actual behavioral modifications in Africa of chimps during civil wars where they actually changed their foraging behaviors, going to night foraging and living in trees as opposed to on the ground because they were being slaughtered during civil wars. So there's parallels in the animal kingdom for behavioral modifications. And the example in this case would be the predator or the scavenger modification of not scavenging those sites even though there was fresh meat and bones there.
Sure.
So you're looking at different examples of behavioral modifications within the natural animal kingdom based upon environmental or other types of climatological pressures.
Right. So basically, some scavenger would have said, "No, I know better than to go over there and mess with those bones because I know what left it."
Exactly, because they're either what other possible reason why would they turn down a free meal or free food? Right. Because it's not a naturally occurring behavior. They have to not only have to have been marked, but they have to be aware and understand contemporaneously right now that if they do that, they might be subjected to whatever.
Sure.
Now, ongoing, there has to be animals that migrate through that area. So if there's an ongoing presence, the creature's still there. If it's a historical understanding, then that might suggest that animals have more sentient knowledge than we understand.
That's very interesting, actually. That's extremely interesting. So basically, there's a chance that this animal or this humanoid, if you will, is basically there all the time in that area.
Absolutely, and historical accounts and ongoing contemporaneous accounts absolutely suggest that. The skookum body cast was found within proximity. Shovel-shaped teeth were found on the fruit evidence from the skookum body cast expedition. I was just sent a picture of a peanut butter jar that supposedly a big BFRO investigator collected that had similar teeth marks. I did a preliminary examination last night, and it has full molar impressions that exhibit, once again, hominoid mastication characteristics of the triangular molar cusp impression. It also has shovel-shaped incisor evidence on the edge of the bottle as well, in approximately the same radial arc as what we have out here in the Pacific Northwest on those teeth. And I'm going to examine that evidence after we release this paper in the interim between that time and the peer review process. So,
good.
But there's ongoing evidence, and I'm getting calls all the time now that this thing is becoming more publicized and becoming across the internet, that people are finding this types of evidence all the time. Bottom line is this: if I don't call it Bigfoot or Sasquatch, if whatever people want to call it is a real creature, then it has to eat, has to sleep, it has to reproduce, has to communicate.
Sure.
A creature that size has to eat a lot of food. And that is why I chose that avenue of inquiry, because it seemed to me had much more promise than trying to catch a picture or trying to get a video or a piece of hair or an eyewitness account. That if it ate, it was going to leave sign, and it was going to be sign that the forensic science would embrace, sign that you can't fake. And this is important, and I want to be very clear about this to your listeners. You can't fake forensic dental evidence. The evidence speaks for itself. There are no tool marks. There are no heat processing marks. There are no fire marks. There are no naturally occurring marks. The evidence is clear. It's not a cast. It's not an eyewitness account. It's not a possibly contaminated hair from a brown bear. It's forensic dental evidence, the same kind of evidence that sends people to prison for the rest of their lives. It's that simple.
So, okay, now with this type of evidence, I mean, is the idea with this evidence, can this evidence classify this animal?
Once again, that's beyond my level of expertise. Mm-hmm. In preliminary consultations and in the interest of disclosure, I want to tell that your reader, your listeners, is that I have been in contact with Dr. Melton. He looked at the original tooth cutouts, the dental aversion load, attributed injuries, and suggested that I write a paper as a way of pulling this together. The first draft of the paper didn't go over very well with him because I extended beyond the evidence and suggested a classification in lines of what Dr. Bindernagel suggests of classification before actually harvesting a specimen. At that point, it became obvious that Dr. Bindernagel and Dr. Meldrum philosophically differed at that point. Dr. Meldrum also looked at my syllabus for the first CSI, Bigfoot, Where Legend Meets Science, because I used his texts in my courses. I also used Dr. Bindernagel's texts in my courses as well. He gave me a very valuable suggestion, which is just examine the evidence, period. No speculations. And I am not here to say Bigfoot is a giant relic hominid or Bigfoot is a giant hybrid. The evidence clearly suggests hybrid. But I'm here to present the evidence with my research partners in a way that's clear, that's cogent, that's verifiable, and that's repeatable, as required by scientific inquiry. At that point, we release it to people that have that pay grade. They take that evidence and they determine if it's valid, if it's repeatable. And then they move beyond that, and we'll allow them not only the privilege, but the process of determining a new name for this species, whatever it is. I do believe that it is. One that I suggested was Gorilla gorillo septionales, which just very simply means North American gorilla. We'll see what it ends up being. I am not particularly interested in owning the classification or anything else. I think that would be an honor best bestowed on the people whose shoulders and whose work that we stand on, and without which it wouldn't be possible. It wouldn't even be possible to even examine the types of materials. And all I ask for from your listeners and from those scientists, and I've earned it. I've earned it by being an advocate. I've earned it by teaching the courses. I've earned it by gathering the data. Is just an honest reading of the data. That's it. I don't want to be the focus of what we're doing here. I want people to look at the evidence, because that's why we're doing it. It's for the people. It's for the scientists and the people. And so we can move forward. I get a little sidetracked here. But we can move forward on to the rest of the behavioral evidence, and we can pull it all together for you when you're ready. So
I'm ready. You go right ahead.
Okay. So basically what we're looking at here, we came out and determined that we had an unknown type of phenomenon occurring. In context, historically and contemporaneously, there's been a lot of footprints, skookum body casts, a lot of sightings historically in the area from Native Americans and so forth. And so I determined that the avenues that the current Bigfoot trackers, the Bigfoot community were working on was great for them, but it wasn't going to produce the kind of results that I thought that we needed. Conclusive forensic evidence results that were modern, that would be accepted upon examination by the most virile critics. So I drafted a strategy to go out to accomplish that. It generated new types of evidence, and we were able to definitively isolate those sites and coordinate them under forensic dental taphonomy and neo-ethnologic behavioral profiles. We compared the evidence from each individual site within those two research structures or matrices to determine if there was commonalities. Then we cross-compared site evidence both within the tooth range or the taphonographic evidence and then the behavioral evidence as exhibited by the bone stacking behaviors. As we move forward through the examination to the analysis stage, it came to the obvious conclusion that what we had was a giant hominoid, unclassified type of organism that had quintessential human mastication chewing morphology, physiodentition morphology, and process strategy that was clearly evident in the data and the literature as easily compared by the literature and forensic pictures for visual comparison. It's not that difficult. We're not looking at something that's extremely complicated. Your general layman can easily understand the evidence. Unfortunately, that wouldn't have been good enough for the luminary community, and so we have to analyze and put this together in a scientific framework based upon the evidence and current existed in class and accepted scientific canon. We're trying to situate this within current and accepted science in order to expand the body of knowledge, not displace it. We want to add to our understanding of the scientific body of knowledge related to this phenomenon as opposed to displace it or prove it wrong. I believe that it's a current, naturally occurring creature that has specific behaviors, specific communication strategies. One other thing I want to mention is if it does indeed have a phonetic language, which I think it does, it has to have a hyoid bone in its throat, which is also characteristic of Neanderthal, which will allow them the same ability to speak modern languages as we have. If Sasquatch or Bigfoot or this organism, whatever you want to call it, has that language, and the literature suggests it very well may have, that is one more piece of evidence that mutually supports the evidence that we have. We also found a 16-inch footprint within close proximity of the two major sites. It wasn't exactly next to the site, but we believe that we disturbed that creature when we went back into the woods because we heard something tearing off into the bushes, and the material that the cast was made, the successful cast was made, was of a duff substrate that would have snapped back within a day at the most.
Right.
So it had to have been within 12 hours at the most, and we were able to definitively track back, measure the step line and track line. And the interesting part is the locations of all the prey bone assemblages were all between 2,900 and 3,900 feet elevation, what could be interpreted as terrain pinch point kill sites with blue and red huckleberries in extreme abundance. Also, none of the sites were within a mile of any road or trail. These were isolated sites. So it would take someone was out there trying to play games. It's just not feasible or possible to recreate that type of evidence that's coordinated across 3 independent sites.
Sure.
And to wrap it all up in a bow for your listeners, the evidence in every category, as examined, analyzed, and situated in context within the literature, the same literature that these people that are going to examine the report, I used their citations to parallel support our observations. So when they look at their own work next to mine, then they'll make a decision if their work is accurate and if my work is an accurate representation of their work. We have a series of pieces of evidence that all are interlocking and mutually supported, that all strongly suggest a creature based upon the extrapolated size of the foot of 8 feet 8 inches tall, based upon contemporary average human measurements, that is able to run down and kill deer and elk and catastrophically separate the elk's spinal column. No scavengers have revisited the site. The only scavenger evidence is a very small, which strongly suggests that the site has been marked with some olfactory substance, and the resident animal species are very aware of it and leave it alone. Consequently, the total package together suggests not hominoid, not hominin, but hominid, which is a new classification of relic hominid or hybrid hominin, living, breathing, and existing now and historically in the Mount St. Helens ecosystem of the Cascade Mountain Range.
Very interesting. Very, very, very interesting stuff. Now, you mentioned that you're going to send this off for peer review. What is your goal there? I mean, when do you plan on doing that? When do you expect answers? I mean, do you have anything predetermined or hopeful?
At this point, we have given a lot of thought to the peer review process. Considering the stigma attached to the research and the questions surrounding it, we felt it would be better at this point to do a 2-track peer review system. What we'd like to do and what we're planning to do is release the report on the 15th of June, on or about the 15th of June. We've picked 20 world-renowned scientists, luminaries in each individual discipline, scientists that I've cited within the document, and the first track, we're going to send this document with them with a request for peer review. Secondly, we're going to release this to the general public, and we're going to encourage discussion on all of the boards. We're going to encourage discussion at all of the seminars that happen on a regular basis. And we encourage the general population, the community, your listeners that are listening to me right now. This is why we're doing this. This is why we wrote this. And this is why we took the time to do this for the community. Because you don't have to have a PhD in molecular biology or paleozoology in order to make a discovery, in order to understand the relevance of what you found, and then in order to examine it in the absolute best possible way you can, and then hand it off. You hand it off to the people that are above you and the people who are responsible for this activity, and allow them to take the ball farther down the field. I'm not sure if this is going to definitively prove the existence of Bigfoot, as people call it, but I do know one thing for sure. There is something living there that has human tooth structures, human chewing strategies, and this killing and eating animals, and has been for a long time, and contemporary and historical literature suggests and supports exactly the same thing that we're suggesting and that we're creating as our conclusions. And it's not just us. The Skookum body cast evidence confirms our tooth observations for the shovel-shaped teeth. So we have situated this piece of research not only geographically but historically within the evidence of these other luminary scientists, to include the footprint with Dr. Meldrum, to include the body cast with Dr. Sarmiento and Dr. Swindler, and all of the other luminaries, Dr. Bindernagel as a macro-level grade 8 theoretician. We've situated our research. If you look at the proportions and the step lengths of the hominid track and measurements, they align perfectly with Dr. Hennen Fehrenbach's research on footprints, proportionalities, and a bell curve shaped graphs related to real and extant populations of animal species. So if you look at the context of our research with an anthropological history, you're looking at characteristics of Neanderthal. If you situate our research on the Bigfoot side of the equation, all of the material that we've pulled together also is supported with proportionalities, with measurements, with step line, with stride lengths. So not only is it situated within context within modern and accepted scientific canon, but if you take it to the Bigfoot side of the community, it's also accurate and situated within the same measurements and proportionalities that they've put forward in order to build a profile of this creature's size and proportionality. So we have multiple examples of interlocking, self-supporting information that all say the same thing, situated within historical and contemporaneous context, also within the literature on both sides of science, modern and traditional science, and paleozoological Bigfoot science. It jives, it sings, it meshes like a finely tuned watch. And it's clear, verifiable, it's repeatable, and we offer it to any scientist for free that wants to look at the database, that wants to look at every photograph, every piece of information for free. We're not interested in making money.
Right.
We're interested in moving the ball down the line and giving a great handoff to someone in the Bigfoot community or somebody in the mainstream traditional science community. We're trying to show that people, ordinary, everyday people, can make a difference, can be curious, and can collect information and establish profiles and protocols and can move the ball forward. I like to say this. I'm a field researcher. I don't teach at a university. I teach in the continuing education department. As everybody knows, it's generally free or reduced classes for the community. I'm not a luminary scholar. What I am is this person that has a world-class education, international education on the international honor rolls, who has a burning curiosity that came across a very interesting opportunity and decided to use every skill and every thought that I could possibly think of to try to package this up and allow people the ability to take what we have put together and run with it. That's what we want. We want your readers and your listeners, Dr. Meldrum and Dr. Bindernagel, we want them to run with it. We want to support their work. And if we can put one little piece of the puzzle closer together, then we've succeeded. And the exciting part about this find, the very exciting, provocative part, is it's forensic evidence. You can't fake it. It's clear. It's geographically distributed. It's not an anomaly. It's a pattern. It's proof. Clear, definitive, repeatable, verifiable, easy to understand, clearly documented, situated within the research and the literature proof of an unidentified carnivore taxa. Above and beyond that, what other people determine that they want to classify it at or describe it as, that's their business. I just hope, personally, that someone like Dr. Meldrum or Dr. Bindernagel or Dr. Green or Mr. Krantz, God rest his soul, Dr. Krantz, gets credit for it. Right. Because those are the guys that have risked everything. They've risked their reputations, they've risked their tenure, in order to blaze the trail. Those are the guys whose efforts are the shoulders that we humbly stand on.
Well, I'll tell you, I think that's very well said, and I think that's very gracious of you to say that, and I believe you that that's what you're looking for, and I think that's great. That's awesome. I do want to ask, and I'm going to go back to this real quick because I touched on this earlier. We were discussing the DNA, and I'm telling you, I completely understand you're a heck of a lot more intelligent than I am. You're very much more educated than I am. But I would urge you to take that meat or a piece of it and maybe reach out to, I don't know, someone like Dr. Todd Disclose, and just see, if it comes back nothing, it comes back nothing. But I think it would be advantageous for you to do so, But obviously, it's your work. I'm not trying to influence that in any way.
Right.
That's just, I guess if I could give you any advice, that's what I would hope for. But you again, this stuff way better than I do, and I can tell you that based on the information you're telling me tonight, this is great stuff. I mean, if as far as from the very first second you found it until now, it sounds like you've done everything right. You've taken all the proper steps. You've done the collection. You've done the analysis. You've got people involved who are quote unquote qualified. Not that you're not, but people who are, as I say, quote unquote qualified. You've reached out. You have a plan in place. For that, I commend you, and I think you're going to do. I think it's great stuff, and I'm excited about it.
I'm excited as well, and not for myself. I'm excited for your listeners. I'm excited for the community, and I'm excited for humanity. And this is what I want to tell people. This is more than just about Bigfoot, and we talked about the media character that I put together to be a public relations vehicle. Part of that character, and I'll mention it on the air here, is Johnny Dagger, Bigfoot Tracker. I've caught a lot of flack from that, being an ulterior personality, and that's not what it is. And people need to understand that. It is a public relations vehicle that puts something kind of interesting and kind of cool together to try to bring the science down to the layman level that people can understand and be entertained and still see that not only is it entertainment, but we're trying to do serious science. And it's important that people understand that what we're trying to do is about preservation and conservation. And that's what I teach my classes, and that's what I left with my final remarks today, is how we treat this phenomenon, how we treat this creature is going to say a lot about who we are as a species, as a steward of our planet. And how are we going to act? Do we have to kill a sample species in order to classify it? Dr. Bindernagel suggests that we don't. Dr. Meldon seems to not be sure. Myself, I am a fierce advocate for not killing the species in order to make a classification. But once again, that's beyond me, and the heavyweights, the kingmakers, they're going to have to decide how to handle that. But this, for me, is about preservation, conservation of habitat and animal organisms, and confronting humanity with another chapter of who we are and where we came from to give us the opportunity to make changes in the way that we're treating each other and treating our planet. It kind of sounds environmental gobbledygook, but I believe that. I believe that how we treat this species is going to say a great deal for who we are as a species.
Sure, and I'll tell you, like Dr. Bindernagel, I definitely don't want to see one harmed or killed or in any way, shape, or form. However, the human race is too curious to let it go. And,
I agree.
When you mention, it's going to define who we are. Unfortunately, if you look back through history, we've already defined ourselves, and I don't think that that's going to change. And it's unfortunate, and it's sad But that's, I feel, exactly what's going to happen once they're classified and once they're found. It's going to happen. I don't want it to, but that's what's going to happen.
I have to disagree, and here's why. It would have already happened to now. People are out there just as fiercely now, and I believe as they would if we made a specific discovery. And here's why. This is an extremely elusive creature. I've been out in the bush, and I've military trained. I've been paralleled by this creature in the bush and was never able to get close to it. It understands the terrain. It's a master hunter. It can see at night. It can hear better. And I truly believe that it's not going to change anything, that this creature is extremely elusive, and it will maintain that elusivity, and it will continue to teach its offspring, if that's the scenario, the same type of behaviors. And I'll tell you one other thing. When you're ready, I know a place in eastern Washington, I just took a group of students there 2 weeks ago, that will almost guarantee you a Bigfoot experience. Every time I go over there, it's Bigfoot City. Eyes everywhere, tree knocks, screams, you name it. And it's just amazing. I've been able to develop through my research and field work a specific protocol from calling them down off the mountain. I was able to get them down there within an hour of our arrival 2 weeks ago. And one of my students, I wasn't there at the time. I was off with another group of students. One of the students had a sighting of a large one and a small one walking right through the edge of our camp where we had set up that night. I had a group of students up in a place that's very popular in the Bigfoot community. I'm not going to mention it on the air because I don't want it flooded with people.
Sure.
I laid out some chem lights so we could look back to the road, and something which looked like some kind of hand or some kind of hairy something was playing with the chem light. It was literally moving his hand back and forth like you would in front of a flame.
Sure.
I pointed it out to my students, and then whatever it was covered up the chem light with its whatever it was using to, make that reflection.
Right.
Everybody saw it. They all heard the screams. They all heard the tree knocks. I found footprints out there. It's by Yakima. It's an extremely interesting place, and just between me and you, when you're ready, I'll take you out there and show you how I'm calling them in.
We discussed that last week when we talked on the phone, before, back when you were agreeing to do an interview with me today, and you mentioned that to me, and I'll tell you what, that has been on my mind ever since, and I am excited for an opportunity, and when, I live all the way over in Ohio, but when I get an opportunity to get out there, I promise you, you will get a call from me, and I'll be like, all right, I'm going to be out there on this day. Can we do that?
Not a problem.
It's going to happen. And,
not a problem. I've got it dialed down to a 12-hour trip. From where I'm at, it takes me an hour and a half to get to the location. And then I work my magic for 5-6 hours, and then it's about an hour and a half back. So it's about a 12-hour field trip from my location here off of, just south of Olympia, the state capital of Washington State. So, and I've been able to simulate the same behaviors over and over and over again. So once again, this is not an anomaly. This is a process that's ongoing in this specific location, and it's just off the chain. Amazing.
And it's showing patterns, and they're not fluctuating patterns. These are exact patterns from what I'm understanding. I mean, you're getting the same different, or I guess definition in the teeth marks as you do the foot marks. You get, the footprints. You're getting the exact same thing and everything, which is fascinating. And I'm really looking forward to reading your paper, which I guess you're going to have it out June 15th. You said, is that going to be?
That is correct, June 15th. And once again, what we're going to do is, and I'll let your listeners know this, we're sending it out to a group of luminaries. The same day we're going to post it. I'm going to post a hot link online. A huge amount of people have been calling in Centralia College. And by the way, if you're listening, don't send any hate mail for me to Centralia College, please. I would appreciate it. They have got a few pieces of hate mail, and that's not where we want to be, people. We're trying to, work together here. So if you want to send your name and your information, that's fine. But be respectful of the college, please. Secondarily, they're going to send those names to me on the 15th in the database. I'm going to put the hot link in and send them out. There's a number of people, including yourself, that I've promised also an email. I'll include you in that database transmission. I'll be doing a follow-up interview with the local paper as well. At that point, the report, I'm sure, will go viral across the internet.
Yeah, I am sure you will.
Right.
And I want to kind of put you in a corner here real quick, because I want to ask.
Absolutely.
When you do this, when you publish this paper and you start getting reviews back from not only the general public, but as well as the professors and the these guys, I want to invite you back on the show again so we can discuss their findings and go from there. Would you be willing to do that?
Absolutely, and I'm going to even take it one step further. This is the third element of our peer review process, is we want to publish, but we want to make sure we publish correctly. And so what we're going to be doing is taking the information that we received back from the luminaries that actually agree to do the peer review, and also review all of the board information and the site and seminar information, and revisit the paper to add where it needs add, or make clear where we need clarification. And at that point, we will submit to a major anthropology or biology publication for consideration. But what we wanted to do, and this is in recognition of what your readers have said, is that I don't have the terminal graduate degree in order to clearly and singularly get this published. I do not believe that. But what I do believe is I can get this out there in front of the people that do.
Absolutely.
Once I get the feedback and I can shore up the paper if needed, then I'll submit publication within the guidelines of that specific publication. But I truly believe this has been part of the problem, is that people are siloing themselves, their information, and not allowing other people to participate. And that's why I want everyone to participate. Because even the luminaries that are doing the peer review, they don't have the time or the passion in order to fine-tooth comb every period and every word and every vocabulary usage. But the Bigfoot community does. They eat it, breathe it, and sleep it. So if you take a combination of the high-level scientific traditional scientist peer review, you add that with a huge grain of salt to the general public peer review, what you have as you sift it down is a very well-reviewed paper. Period.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's the key. We're not bypassing traditional science. We're just going in a more comprehensive direction.
And I tell you, when you send that to me, I will post it. I will make sure I get it to as many people as I can.
Right.
I'm sure your channels are probably bigger than mine, so I'm sure people will be seeing it more than once.
Well, I'll tell you honestly, I don't participate a lot in the Bigfoot community, the postings, the boards, or anything else. And here's why. As I mentioned before, it's brutal. It's a bloodbath, and it's extremely discouraging. And I want to say that to your readers, or your listeners, excuse me, is that it's discouraging when people like myself try to engage other people in a serious conversation about this topic matter, and it devolves into juvenile name-calling, or, the conversation moves off in a different direction. It just really does a disservice to not only me and other people who want to try to help, but it feeds into the stigma, and it feeds into the idea that this is a joke, and it's pathetic, and there's a stigma attached. And one of the things I'm doing and hope to do, and I know I won't be completely successful, is to engage the critics, to make them a part of the process so we can move beyond juvenile expressions of angst and actually look at the science.
Absolutely.
And communicate together and cooperate and collaborate. That's how things get done. That's how we discover new discoveries, is to cooperate and share the credit and recognize the people that broke the trail and whose shoulders we stand on. It's not about me. It's about the people.
Absolutely. Well, Mitch, listen, man, I have been thoroughly impressed with our conversation. I think you're on the right track. I want to thank you sincerely for giving me the opportunity to discuss this with you on the phone, and giving me an opportunity to share your findings and what your plans are, and if is there anything that I may have forgotten or maybe we missed that you want to add?
There's two things I want to say.
Sure.
First of all, once again, we stand on the shoulders of those who come before us. The research is within context and within traditional science, and we use the latest research to comparatively prove our analysis for the people. It's for the people. It's not for us. The material is free of charge for anybody who wants to look at it and examine it. And that's an important distinction, that there's no monetary gain here at all related to this paper and these activities. It's not for money. It's for the people. Secondly, if you see what you think is a bone stack, don't touch it. Take pictures, mark the site, survey tape around it, call you, and you call me. And we'll send somebody out there if it's reasonably close, or we'll contact somebody else out there. One of the things that we're doing is developing a protocol, a process for securing the site, for examining the material, for collecting it, for cataloging it, like you talked about, forensic science or, a crime scene. Bringing a higher level of scientific protocol and procedures to not only track casting, DNA collection, but evidence of feeding collection, so there's no standards that are being broken. So the protocol collections are standardized, clear, and accepted. That's the only way we can collect evidence in a way that we can analyze it clearly without bias, is to have protocols for evidence collection and analysis. And that's what we're doing, and that's why it's in the title of the paper, is developing a profile to establish a baseline. And once again, so the people can take the ball and run with it and go from there. There's a huge amount of directions, cross-disciplinary directions, and we mentioned that in our What Do We Do Now or Going Forward, suggestions for future research. There's a huge amount of areas here that lay people and credentialed scientists can take up and move in those different directions. There's a huge amount. It's wide open. The biggest problem that we had was keeping it focused clearly, definitively on the evidence, and thank goodness for Dr. Meldrum's early admonition. It stung, but he was absolutely 100% correct. Just the fact, man, as Joel Friday used to say.
He usually is very, very nice guy. I had the privilege of interviewing Dr. Meldrum, and I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, just like I have yours. And, well, I'll tell you what, guys, with that, listeners, listen, stay tuned to the Bigtruth channel, because we're going to get back in touch with Mitch Townsend again, and we're going to find out what the evidence is or what the response is to his evidence, I guess is how I want to put that. So stay tuned, and we'll catch you next time.